Hi, my name is Genieve Garay, and I will be presenting Essential Linguistics Chapter 4, entitled English Phonology. So what the authors did with this chapter is they focused on two guiding questions. The first is, how do people understand and produce language? The second is, what is phonology and how do linguists describe the phonology of a language? So it gets pretty detailed, but I'll do my best to guide us through it. The key vocabulary that they centered on are phonology. This is the study of sounds across languages, and phoneme is the smallest sound that makes a difference in meaning with a given language. So the first section will cover over the first question. This is the complexities of communication, and everything that goes into communicating is not as simple as what we would see here, like an idea, and this is a figure in the book where we have an idea, the speaker just encodes it to some sort of language, and then we have an acoustic signal, what we hear, and then the listener is going to decode that language and get the idea that came from here. It seems like a common sense view of communication. However, a common sense view of communication is that the speaker starts with an idea, encodes it into language, understanding the message requires the listener to decode the acoustic signal into language and understand the original idea. This is taken from our book. However, it's not that simple. It's much more complex, and we can see all these ideas coming out. Well, we have to convey a message. What the speaker has to do, they have to draw from a register. This is where you think of your context. For example, if you're at a mechanic, some vocabulary that you might use are cabin filter, alignment, etc. So you choose your context and what you're going to use for that context. Then you have to think of your proper tone or tenor, which will be formal or informal. For example, if you're at the mechanic and you take on too formal a register, it might come across as condescending. But if it's too informal, you might have some unclear meaning. Signal the meaning also by gestures, facial expressions, and sometimes also your tone of voice. Redundancy in language, also you're thinking, well, I might say words like she, he, or if I have words that end in ed and say yesterday, then that signals, for example, here a female, and if I have ed in yesterday, that would be past tense. So what the listeners have to do in conversation, they have to make predictions according to the context. For example, if I'm talking to the clerk, I can assume that she's going to have a nice day. They also reference teenagers. If they're coming home late, what they predict what their parents might already say. They might not listen as much because they're basing on those predictions. Also, they make different inferences based on your background knowledge. However, this is can be difficult for some because if you don't have the same background knowledge as somebody, you might not draw on the same inferences. Deciding on polysemous words, for example, if we know fork, and we talked, we know with emergent bilinguals, colloquialisms can be difficult for them. So if they know the meaning of fork as the eating utensil, they might not understand a fork in the road, which leads us on, they have to decide, should I take it literally or non-literally? So they mention a book, and some people might be familiar with the Amelia Bedelia books. I used to use them also for teaching inferencing and figurative language. And so she's a character that just does not understand these. And so they reference, this is a good example of teaching the figurative language and for meaning. And then deciding on whether these marks are direct or indirect, such as the garbage is full. That has an indirect message of take out the garbage. So authors mention Grice's principle, and this is what they believe is happening between the two involved in the conversation. So they suggest that the speakers and listeners follow this cooperative principle, and they summarize it in these 4 maxims that happen as they converse with others. So the first one is the maxim of quality, of truth, to stick with the truth in anything that is correct statements. The maxim of quantity, information, don't give too much information, just give enough to get your message across. Maxim of relevance, you want to make sure that you stay within your topic. And the maxim of clarity, where you want to make sure don't be ambiguous, just again give the clear picture. However, they feel if you violate one of these 4 maxims, that this would be an unsuccessful conversation. So as humans, we are programmed to use sounds to communicate. However, they do mention those that are hearing impaired, that they have to find an alternate method. The way that they mention here, the benefits of communicating, it's a hands-free, that way you can be doing something with your hands at the same time. It's very practical, such as also communicating when you're in another room and you're calling out to somebody in another room, or if it's the dark, you can call out to each other. So all these instances where you can communicate, it's just more practical to use sounds. Also, our humans are adapting our speech to communicate. So they give the example of babies that can be drinking the milk and breathing at the same time. However, if we do that, we probably will choke. But it's just that when, as we mature, the larynx drops down, and that allows more room for communication with speaking. The humans produce an average of 8 phonemes per second. Again, that's when we're talking. So it's just something phenomenal that happens too. And that the brain sends messages to the muscles that control the speech. These messages, again, are very complicated, but that's how we know what's about to happen. So for the second part of the question, the second question is, how do linguists study phonology? And this is where it gets really tedious, so I'll do my best to give us a rundown. It'll remind you of your linguistics class if you take them in undergrad. They describe 4 steps in the process of producing the meaningful sounds, okay? So they describe language in these 4 ways. The first one is they break the language into discrete units, which we mentioned are phonemes. They categorize these units once they identify them into different groups, so they group them here in the units, and then they find the dependencies among the units, like what are the commonalities of these units, etc. So the first one, they break the speech stream into discrete units. This is where they have to see, do sounds have a role in meaning? For example, the minimal pairs p and b, they say, like in pet and bet. If I were to change them, it does change the meaning. Pet would be, of course, our animal. Bet would be, when you're making a bet with somebody. We have about 40 phonemes in our English language, and Spanish has 23. So when we're considering the English learners, think of the difference that they have to acquire. Also, it depends on the regional variation. Sometimes you'll have more or less phonemes, depending on the way that a speech community speaks in the particular region. The linguists use the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, to describe the sounds and sound systems. So this is how they're going to transcribe them so that people in other areas of the world can also read this. The phonemic transcription is done by phoneme. For example, the word stripped, even though it has 7 letters, it has 5 phonemes and ends up looking like this. This would be the strip sound. And then we have phonemes of a language that don't sound the same each time they are produced. So just because I have, for example, the p sound as in P, that we use the letter P, if we have it at the beginning, like in pet, there's an aspiration, like the air that comes with pet. And if we have it at the end, like in flip, we don't have that aspiration at the end. Categorizing the units, this is where we see where the sounds are produced. And each phoneme can be described by its place and manner of articulation and whether or not it is voiced. The places of articulation here are in the diagram that they show in the book. So the speech sounds of languages are created by changes in that vocal tract. So as the air is passing here through the vocal cords, sometimes it'll pass through without constriction, and that's where you'll get your vowel sounds. However, if it is constricted, then that's where you get your consonant sounds. So we have our diagram here that talks about the different places, like as in labial, where you'll have your lips, your labiobidental, where it'll be with your teeth, or right behind this, which will be your interdental, would be within the teeth. Right behind that is the alveolar, which is that little space where your tongue hits behind your teeth. The hard palate is right behind that, like the roof of your mouth. And as we go back to the velum, that's closer to your uvula right before, and then glottal, which would be here through the air passing. So the English vowels are voiced. The short vowels are called lax vowels, again, because of that air constriction passing more easily, and the constriction of your vocal cords is not as tense. So there are 9 short vowels, and they're represented usually by 1 letter in English when we're spelling them out. The sounds are made by the variations in the tongue position, whether it be high, mid, low, or front, central, or back of the mouth. And a way to feel the differences is going to be like saying some words that we have here. And the graphs that they put, we have to picture that this is your mouth, that this is the front of your mouth here, and with your teeth here, and this is the top part of your mouth, and back here would be your uvula and the vocal cords. So if we think of these words, for example, hit, peep, pat, put, boot, bought, and pot. We think of where they're made. For example, pit, your tongue is going to come up high and front. When we go back to put, your tongue comes back, put. And we want to go to low, we have pot, and your tongue comes way back and low, okay? So that's how we feel the difference, and you can like practice the ones in the book there, that list, and that'll help you feel the way that your tongue is moving. You'd have to go a little slower though. The long vowels, these are going to be your tense vowels again because there's more tension to make these sounds. There are 5 long vowels. They're also called diphthongs, which we get from a Greek meaning of 2 sounds. And they're indicated with 2 special characters when we use the IPA, the transcription system. And they're usually spelled with the 2 letters also when we're spelling them, usually, not always. The reason it's called 2 sounds is that the tongue will start at one position and then it's going to move to another position. It might go upwards, as in an up and toward the palate glide, or like the upside down horseshoe would mean that it's going to glide up and toward the velar, up and back. This would be up and forward, and this would be up and back. So for example, we have bait. Bait starts mid and it glides up, bait. Or we have boat. We have boat, it's going to start mid and come back, boat. Okay, so you kind of have to feel your tongue moving that way. Again, this would be your teeth, the roof of the mouth, and so on. Still on the second section, this is the one that takes the most. Categorizing now the reduced vowel. This is your schwa vowel, the one that is unstressed, and we have the preceding vowel R, which we also call R controlled. The reduced vowel schwa is found in words that have 2 or more syllables. This is the weaker airflow, and it's not going to have stress. For example, in about. So we have about. We have about. You can even clap that second syllable. That's where it gets a stress. The first one doesn't. That would be schwa. They also mentioned imagination. So it would be imagination. So those unstressed would be your schwa syllables. The R-controlled syllables, this one the speaker is going to do a curl upwards with the tongue. It's not going to touch the palate, but it does curl, and that's how it influences those vowels and how they sound. Finally, the English consonants, they gave a whole graph on this because the way that we produce the English consonants is by restricting or actually stopping the airflow as it passes through the vocal tract. The consonants are described by telling where and how the air is constricted, and again, whether it's voiced or voiceless. So to save us even more reading, this graph, if you find it in your book, will tell you how these consonants are made. For example, I have some stops that are voiceless, like in the bilabial, like I would make it with my 2 lips. Or alveolar, t, that's right behind your teeth, and it hits the tongue. The tongue hits the roof of your mouth here. The velar, k, and that hits in the back. But there's no voice, it would just be t, k. For voiced, bilabial, b, alveolar, d, and velar, g. There is voice that comes with this one. For nasals, this is the air passage is going to come through your nose. For example, in These ends are not different. This is the end like in no, and this is the end like in thing or thank. The end comes back here, as we can see from the graph again. Fricatives, this is where we do have the air constriction, but it's going to be minimized. For example, in voiceless, labiodental, where it will be teeth, top teeth and lip, as in that's voiceless. Or theta, which would be like in thing, or alveolar, like in snake. This symbol is going to be sh, so you still feel the airflow, but it's a constricted airflow, and the glottal would just be with, again, voiceless. Voiced would be labiodental, v, that when you feel the voice still. This one is F, and that would be more like the. This would be alveolar Z, again the regular letter Z, and it's actually matching the symbol. This number 3 is going to sound more like j, like in jump. Affricatives, this is where you put the air out, but it's going to stop it also. Like this right here, when I combine the T with the sh sound, it's going to be ch, so you release it. When we have voiced, this would be like j, like in measure, okay? A voiced approximant, this is going to be that R sound that rolls your tongue again, that we talked about with the R control vowels, and the O sound. That's going to have airflow on one side of your tongue, and the way that you can see which side it rolls out of, like when you're clicking for a horse, when you go, that whatever side clicks, that's where the air flows when you make the L sound. So for me, it would be the right side. And the glides, which are voiced also, these are also called semivowels. The J sound is actually represented, the Y sound is represented by the letter J here, their symbol anyway. That will be Y and W, and both of those are voiced. That's the gist of the consonants. So I did already go through it.